everybody. My name is Katie and I'd like to welcome you to Frankston City Library's Frank Talk Tonight with Paul Verhoeven. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which Frankston City Library operates, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to extend that respect to elders of other communities that may be joining us tonight. So tonight we are joined by Paul Verhoeven to talk about his latest release, Electric Blue. It's a thrilling look at crime solving in 1980s Sydney, but more than that, Electric Blue is a celebration of relationships, connection and family. It's just that the Verhoevens happen to talk about murder a little more than other families perhaps. So please join me in welcoming Paul. Paul, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. These Zoom things are it's so weird because most of the time they're very work related, whereas this is for pleasure. So I guess it just feels a little different. Thanks everyone. I mean, I'd be looking out on a crowd of people right now, like a kind of side room in the library, but we're all on Zoom and most of us aren't wearing pants, I assume. I'm literally wearing Paddington Bear flannelette pajama pants. I'm not going to pan down. They're very comfortable and I haven't taken them off in about 6 months. It's so good to be here. What time is it? 6 o'clock. I don't even have any concept of time anymore. I've been in a book launch hole for the past 3 weeks. Yeah.
It's very exciting, Paul. So what can you tell us about the book? And just before we do officially get started, I just want to let everyone know if you've got a question for Paul, just pop it in the chat box. I was just saying as people were coming in that we'll pop everybody on mute so that we can all hear each other. I mean, so we can all hear each other, so we can all hear Paul. You don't need to hear each other. Just write it in the chat box. Thank you. So what can you tell us about the book? I love it, by the way. I've just finished reading it and I thought it was amazing and really gross in some parts, but so compelling.
Yeah, it's a disgusting book at times, but it is ostensibly about my dad, who was a police officer in the 1980s in Sydney. When I was about 7 years old, I stumbled into his old case files and basically had about 25 years of pretty bad recurring nightmares as a result of the trauma of kind of what I saw. And a couple of years back, I kind of sat down with the editors over at Penguin and said, hey, what I'd like to do is basically write Princess Bride if the stories told about Wesley were real and it's me and Dad sitting there kind of talking about Dad's time in the 80s as a cop. And they said, yes, please. And they let me write a book called Loose Units. And so Loose Units is basically like a father-son road movie, black comedy adventure story based on real stuff that my dad did in the 80s in Sydney as a cop. And then we decided to do a spin-off podcast where every week Dad and I sit down and talk through, case files that didn't make it into the book. But we got to the end of Dad's time in uniform in general duties. And it turns out that he was in forensics, which is basically like CSI in the 80s. And we did a season about that. And then I went to Penguin and said, hey, could I write a sequel, could I write like a book about Dad's time in forensics? And they said, yes, please. And that's what Electric Blue is. So I've got a copy here. I mean, how pretty is that? It's so great. It's been the past, couple of years of my life getting this thing out. And the whole thing has been edited and launched during COVID. So never let it be said that you can't find insane levels of untapped productivity when you've got nothing else to do. But yeah, it's kind of a weird hybrid, as you'll now know, Katie. It's a weird mashup of genres. So I think it's funny, it's extraordinarily violent, and it's all based on real things that Dad did from the years of, I would say, about 1982 to 1985, maybe. He was stationed at North Sydney Police Station in uniform. But when he ended up in forensics, he was at Chatswood Scientific. And I don't know how many people out there have been to Chatswood, but yeah, I could plausibly see a lot of crime happening there. So he had a lot of stuff to deal with.
Right. So tell us about that research process. So how formal did you make those chats with your dad? Was it that you would just chat with him and then make notes afterwards? Or did you go into conversations being like, Dad, give me the good stuff?
Well, look, I mean, not to trivialize it, but one of the great things about the Loose Units Electric Blue thing is that it's based on true events. So it's effectively tall tales morphed and kind of crafted and smashed together and broken apart again based on real things that happened. Normally, true crime, you know, if you're a true crime buff, and there's so many people out there who love true crime, I love true crime. You'll sit there with newspaper clippings and you'll be Googling frantically and looking up, you know, kind of snapshots and going, well, that doesn't line up and these dates don't make sense. The great thing is, it's Dad, who is an unreliable narrator, trying to impress me, his son, who is a writer and comedian. And along the way, a lot of things get kind of joyfully futzed and messed with. So we feel somewhat less beholden to the specificity, which means as far as research goes, Dad just sits there and sort of blunders his way through a story, and then I kind of take it and build it into something. We sat down for the podcast, and I tried to keep it chronological. So I tried to go from his enrolling in forensics. He was actually going to be a detective. He was accepted into the detectives division, I guess, because what he wanted to do was get past all the kind of grunt work and get to that part where you get to be in plain clothes and have the cool holster, you know, on your side with the gun and step under the police tape and solve really big problems. And in the 80s, there were a lot of very big, very bloody problems in Sydney. And so he got the offer to the detectives department, but at that point, he kind of had a litany of involvement with, he witnessed a lot of police corruption, and the detectives were kind of the worst. This is during the time when Roger Rogerson was at his peak. Excuse me. And Dad basically went, you know what, I want to try and find another way to channel those kind of urges I have to, you know, really solve problems. And he got an offer to join forensics. And so he ended up in chats with doing forensics. And every week on the podcast, we go through his cases, you know, roughly in order. And when it came time to do the book, I basically pulled all the audio, all the raw audio from those sessions, kind of arranged them on little Post-its, tried to kind of build it into a narrative, and then threaded through a kind of meta-narrative around it. And it's been so incredibly deconstructed that when Dad got the book 2 weeks before it came out, he was sitting there reading it going, mate, this is not exactly how it happened, but it feels like it happened that way. And I think that's one of the great things. Neil Gaiman said it once. A thing doesn't have to have happened to be true. Does that make sense? Mm. And there are points in the book where it's basically just, you know, there's a few cases in there from my mum, who is actually watching this Zoom chat right now from home, because Mum was a cop as well on the force. Mum and Dad met on the force. Their love story is kind of a through line through my books. And with Mum, it was very different. With Mum's cases, Mum just sort of told it like it was. Mum didn't want to make a fuss. She would just sit there and just kind of blur into the microphone. It's really easy dealing with someone who doesn't have tickets on themselves because they haven't built themselves into like a mythical figure. Dad spent many years telling stories, holding court, and kind of trying to impress his friends with these stories about things he did. But he never told the stories to me because he didn't think I was psychologically capable of coping with these stories. And I'm wondering now if this book would even exist. There's something incredible about waiting over 30 years to like pull the genie out of the bottle. But that's kind of what we've done.
What was that experience like for you as a kid with both parents sort of going off? And I know that your mum and dad had varied experiences on the job and then doing other, I'll call them projects, but other sort of careers that they did as well. What was that like though as a kid? Was it just that mum and dad were going off to work, or did you? I
don't actually remember. No, I have zero memory of that stuff. All I remember is these photographs in this box. So just to kind of bring you up to speed, we had a big walk-in wardrobe, and there were these huge cardboard boxes at the very back that I wasn't allowed to go near. And one day I sort of accidentally, on purpose, like smacked them open and went through them and basically found, because it turns out that if you're a cop, especially someone like my dad, who I should point out is one of those weirdos who actively sought the worst stuff he could find. He wanted to deal with the most horrifying, questionable stuff, which makes him perfect for true crime fans because he's kind of always where the action is. Even in uniform, he was always chasing the scary stuff down. And I don't remember any of that. But I did find all the kind of weird, grisly ephemera, the kind of, the artifacts that his Indiana Jones cave of artifacts that he built over the years. So there were crime scene photos, witness statements, police journals, just kind of bits and bobs of things. And so I remember those. I mean, they scared the crap out of me. But then Mum pulled out a bunch of photographs of Dad in uniform when he was a young man. And I didn't quite register this at the time, because obviously I didn't. But he was 21 when he enrolled in the police force. 21 is, I would say, way too young to be holding a gun. But it was really amazing looking at these photos of Mum and Dad, you know, clearly just kids, again, with guns. And it's interesting because I'm really experiencing what they went through for the first time now as an adult. And I can't imagine what kind of a cop I would have made at 21. Probably a very bad one. But yeah, I mean, there's this one photograph of Dad holding a gun in uniform. And I think when I saw it when I was a kid, and I seem to recall him being this just big hulking figure, you know, like dramatically backlit and the wind whipping against his face. And I look at it now and he's got like bum fluff, like he can't grow facial hair. He's skinny, the shirt doesn't quite fit, and he looks just kind of like a kid. And I think that's been one of the really nice things about Electric Blue and about Loose Units is creating a version of Dad for readers that is as big and heroic as the version up here.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And that respect for him comes through so much. And the love for your mum comes through so much as well, like that. Yeah, it's beautiful. And we've actually just had a question, I believe, that's about your mum. So Asha asks, after doing the parts with your mum, have you found that you see her in a whole new light? Was there any surprises in there? I know that she sort of campaigned for the change. I don't want to give anything away. I'm not going to say that. But she
that's fine. No.
Well, she was an advocate for women in the police force. Yeah.
I'm more than happy to kind of lean on this point. I think it's really cool. So I didn't realise this, but yeah, Mum was one of the pioneering women in the Australian police force. So up to the point where she joined, women officers had to wear pencil skirts. And I don't know about you, but I've tried to chase someone in a pencil skirt and jump a fence to get at them. It's really difficult. And one of Mum's kind of things was like she wanted to campaign and get women into pants, which sounds so basic right now, but they were given tiny guns, 5-shot guns with one less bullet than the man. They were given ornate, like womanly, feminine batons that fit into these special purses that they were given, police issue purses. And yeah, one of the things I didn't know about Mum was how like kind of instrumental she was in helping overhaul all of that stuff. But I also didn't realize how much she enjoys to put a few glasses of wine away and brag about herself under the right circumstances. So I said to her, hey, could we maybe get you into the studio? And she just was so reticent. And then she just had this look in her eye, and I just knew if I just gave her a drink and just sat her down, she'd be fine. And we started doing this like 15-minute episode to talk through some of the stories. 90 minutes later, we'd done 2 full-length episodes, and she just wouldn't stop talking. So when it came time to do the book, and when it came time to create a heroic, like semi-fictional, bombastic Hollywood version of Mum, I kind of didn't have to because in a short period, in like a movie-length kind of session, she put everything about herself completely on Front Street. And she's such an amazing person, and I only shudder to imagine how much she's blushing right now because she is watching this. Also, Mum, if you're watching, it's Shift Command 3 for screen caps. I'm not sure I spelled that. I was trying to get her to kind of, when you try and get people to understand tech stuff and their parents, and it's fine. It's incredible. I'm very lucky to have parents like I do, but I didn't really understand the magnitude of what Mum did until about a year ago, and I hope I did it justice.
I think so. I think it was beautiful. Actually, just behind the scenes before, when Paul and I were chatting, I did say, is Christine, is that the next book? Do you have a book up your sleeve that's all about Christine? Because I want to read that book as well.
Look, I would read that book. Problem is...
We've just had a comment from Caitlin saying that she'd love to hear more from Christine. Yeah, good one, Caitlin. I reckon Christine might start her own podcast if you're not careful.
Well, we thought about I want to have Mum on more often, but the problem is Mum was basically railroaded out of the police force. She did this odd career thing. She jumped across to Romeo Squad, and they basically handled crimes of a violent sexual nature because they thought the best thing to do is get a woman to talk to a woman who's been treated badly, which is, very smart. But then she ended up jumping across to internal affairs for a little bit. Now, she hasn't talked about that stuff yet, She wasn't there for very long. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. Mum's really good at kind of putting up walls that don't look like walls, and you kind of just, you know, it's like a maze that is constantly shifting, and then you leave the maze, and you're like, I don't know how I got here. Whereas with Dad, he just kind of like blows all the walls in the air, and you just run around picking pieces up. So I think, yeah, if Mum was open to it, I'd like to get her involved more in the next one. I do have an idea for the next book, by the way. It's all ready to go. I just have to kind of do it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, now is the time. Corona, as we said, there's lots of good music being released. Why not write another book? So there's been lots of questions actually about your childhood in here. So one, just going back to talking about when you were little and sort of your perception of what was happening with your mum and dad, and maybe you can just put this person's mind at ease, because they've just said, "Hi Paul, I'm married to a detective and our kids are now having to listen to my husband work from home. Are we traumatizing them?" So obviously you're okay. What about your brother and sister? What's their take on it?
You know, I haven't actually asked them, which is the height of ego. Because I'm the oldest, I was around technically the longest. I don't know if I'm traumatized. Maybe I was a little bit. It's tricky, but I mean, I think honestly, knowing the people who are going out and fighting the traumatic things and fighting the evil is probably less traumatic than, you know, opening certain videos on the internet at this point. It was a very different time. I was extremely sheltered. So to go from like being a very sheltered guy to seeing photos of dead people who'd been set on fire, 6:19 p.m. It's probably too early to be talking about that. But it was a really eye-opening experience. I actually grew up and I was very artsy and very kind of gentle and very, you know, don't let the moustache fool you. I was very like, you know, kind of light and frothy and harmless. And I often wonder whether that's because of the things I saw and heard about when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And whether I would have maybe run more proactively into danger if I hadn't been shown the very real consequences of it at such a young age. But, you know, there's some really interesting stuff in Electric Blue. I think I did try to get Dad, or the character based on Dad, I did try and get him to explain to me why I turned out so different. Because at 21, Dad had a gun and was engaged in car chases and, you know, chasing bad guys. At 21 years old, I was studying film at university and I was just like a theatre nerd. It's just, you know, no practical skills, no marksmanship, still can't drive, by the way.
Do you feel like that you've resolved that a little bit now that you've come to the end of the book? I felt like, you know, that journey of trying to, you know, reconcile those differences or just try to understand his perspective and your own.
Yeah.
Do you feel like a little bit more resolved around that sort of stuff now? Or?
I feel a bit more resolved. What's great about the book is that I get to take the building blocks that were given to me by Dad's stories and build them into something and create. There are certain things in the book that are akin to wish fulfillment and that take liberties in a really joyous way. One of the through lines is the fact that, yes, Dad and I did come to a better understanding of each other throughout this process. Dad and I get along incredibly well now. You know, it's always like, you always get annoyed with your parents and you always get exhausted, and family is really complex, but honestly, my relationship with Dad is just so different, to the point where last year I jokingly suggested that we could both get our private investigator licenses and start a father-son PI agency, and he didn't say no.
Oh my God, Paul, that would be goals. That's sort of one of my dreams as well. I would love to do that.
Yeah,
I'm just very nosy, though. I think that's what it is. Just like to investigate.
Dad, now, here's something most people don't know. And Dad doesn't talk about it much, but Dad did have an active PI license at some point during his career. I think he was because after forensics, he bailed on the police force, spent 3 months as a safety inspector investigating industrial accidents, because who doesn't enjoy seeing crushed limbs in the fresh air? And then he joined the New South Wales Fire Brigade, and he was there for like 10 years. And we did a season of the podcast about that, and I called it Loose Units, Hot Stuff Coming Through, a reference he did not appreciate. And I think what's interesting is he has the kind of brain chemistry that I do, but he applies it in different ways. One of the through lines, Katie, of the book is I have ADHD, in case you haven't already gleaned that fact. So what that means is, for those of you who don't know, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which means basically I get obsessed with things and then jettison them and I have trouble focusing. Dad has that with careers. So he'll spend a brief time getting really like hyper focused on a pursuit, whether it's justice or putting out fires, and then he gets bored and just sort of puts it aside. And throughout the process of doing Electric Blue, I kind of figured that we actually, brain chemistry wise, are quite similar. We actually have quite similar inclinations. We both have very similar moral barometers. We both vote the same. We like the same music. His fashion sense is diabolical, but he let me dress him for a photo shoot we did. I took him to Jack London, got his hair cut at my like weird hipster barber shop. Like he's got a lot more in common with me than he thought he did, and vice versa. And that's something that wouldn't have come to pass without the book. Really.
It's sort of that thing that only his son could write that book, and you could only write it about your dad. Like it's a perfect situation, really.
Yeah.
We've got lots of questions here. So.
Great.
This is hilarious. So Asher's saying, have you thought about doing a fiction book series with Hard Seltzer as the hero?
Ah, that's the best question I've ever had. Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say it. This is a cozy little room of people that I trust. So there's a character in Electric Blue called Hard Seltzer. There was one point where in the book, in the recording sessions, I was trying to get Dad to imagine how fun it would be to come up with a cool fake detective name, because detectives always have stupid names. Like in J.K. Rowling's most recent book, Cormorant Strike. That is a stupid name, J.K. But I thought, I was drinking a can of Hard Seltzer with Dad, and I just looked down and thought, that's a cool name for a detective, Hard Seltzer. And so about, I would say 3/4 of the way through Electric Blue, this fictional detective based on me sort of just becomes a fixture of the book in a way that I won't spoil for you. I have like a Hard Seltzer series lined up in a Word document on my computer. Like I want it to happen more than anything. I even went into Animal Crossing and created a Hard Seltzer. I created a Hard Seltzer like universe within Animal Crossing. I'm obsessed with this character. I always wanted to be a detective, but I always lacked the chops. So it was really nice to write a book where I kind of became one, and then had the character of Dad, sort of tacitly endorse me as a fictional detective. So it's like we kind of got to work together in the book in a way. You'll understand when you read it, and for those of you who have read it, you'll get it. And for those of you who have read it, if you want to pick my brains about some of the, like, how do I say this without spoiling anything? There are some hidden bits in the book you can only get to if you sort of figure certain things out. And if you ever want help with those things or finding those things, hit me up on Twitter. I'm more than happy to kind of. It's really hard to talk about without giving stuff away, isn't it? But there's like entire tracts of the book that people will not have read if they didn't do things a certain way. I don't know if that's too obtuse, but yeah, it's not a normal book, and you'll realize that part of the way through, because we're not a normal family, so it didn't feel entirely right. Loose Units was I think, a good book, and it was a fun book, but it's very linear. Electric Blue it's explosively weird. I just thought, look, they say that what if the thing you do, what if the creative thing you do, book, film, music, whatever, what's the last shot you get? What if you don't get another shot? And I was kind of sick of saving all my good stuff for like later runs of things. And I just thought, if this is the last, don't get me wrong, I don't think it will be, but if it is the last thing I ever get to do, I want to have thrown everything at it. And Dad's read it twice, and he's borderline illiterate, so I take that as a compliment.
That's amazing. That's so cool, isn't it? I've got a question here that's a good follow-up question about what is your favourite story? I'm just trying to find it. I read it before. So this is from Jessie. So hi Paul, I'm wondering what is your favourite crime story from your dad and mum? Is it one that you have already covered, or are you keeping any up your sleeve? It sounds like could be a yes and a no.
There's a story in Electric Blue, and God, it's really hard to know whether I should tell it or not. I'll give you like a kind of paraphrase version. There was a heroin smuggling ring that took place in the 80s and 90s in Sydney. And one of the methods of egress for heroin was smuggling heroin inside things that could be easily shipped around without arousing suspicion. And Dad was a big scuba diver at the time. He was a scuba diving instructor, I think, at one point. Maybe he's just a spy. Maybe all these careers are just completely fake and he's just making them up. If I just press a bookshelf in his room and it just slides back and there's guns with silencers and night vision goggles, and a grappling hook, which I've always wanted, by the way. So Dad was a big scuba diver and had this old scuba tank, and he whacked it on the trading post to sell this like secondhand garbage scuba tank for like $20 or whatever. And this dude rocks up and offers, I forget how much money it was, but like an exorbitant sum for an old cast iron scuba tank. And he buys it, and Mum and Dad's alarm bells are going off, and it's clearly dodgy, but they don't care because he's offered them a lot of cash. And they say yes, and I'm not going to give away the second part of the story because it's like a spy thriller. It's great. But I will say this much. He was buying the scuba tank to smuggle heroin, and as a result of what happened next, Mum and Dad were under surveillance from ASIO for about a year. And I didn't know this. We had an unmarked, unlisted number all through when I was growing up. Turns out that's because at one point Dad got on national radio and basically threatened to expose the corruption in the New South Wales police force. And then he got a call about 5 minutes after doing this like really casual phone on ABC 774 on a Saturday. He got this call from the producers freaking out because they're like, they're here, they've come. And then she hung up. It turns out the cops had like triangulated their position, barged in, torn the tapes out of the walls. And then he gets a call on his unlisted number from the head of like the chief of police, basically saying that if he ever said anything again, he would be in trouble. Behind the scenes, things have been very stressful and scary for me growing up. And I think the scuba story is one of my favorites because I was there for it. I was literally in the car as it was happening. Like, I remember this guy. I remember this stuff happening. And now I'm sitting here going, how much other stuff has happened without me knowing? Is Dad involved in espionage right now? Is Dad, he says he's an antique dealer, but what if he's doing something way dodgy?
Classic antique dealer. What a classic cover.
It's not real. It can't be. No, it's not real. It can't be real.
So Jessie's saying that she loves that story and that might have been her favourite in the book as well. Oh, nice. And that it sounded so far-fetched, so she's glad that it was based in reality. That's cool.
Yeah.
She's also saying that she loves your energy, Paul, and I'm sure your ADHD has brought you your superpowers in creating the success in both the podcast and the books. What's next? Surely the energy could be brought onto the stage with you and your dad. You've done some live podcasts, is that right? Have you done some?
Yeah. So we've done live shows. Our first live show was at a place called The Toff in Town, which is this beautiful room. It seats like 250 people up at in Melbourne, in the middle of the city. And we did our first. Oh yeah, it's a great venue, but I mean, Dad hadn't done stuff on stage before, and he just was not convinced that this would translate. So I'm like, Dad, let's just do what we do on the podcast every week. We'll sit across from each other. I'll pivot the chairs at like a 45-degree angle, have a few drinks, we'll have a few laughs, and people will come, no pressure. It sold out in like 2 hours. It was a full room. There's footage of it online. It's insane. We did this live show. We did a big book signing afterwards. And after that, his ego was so inflated, and mine too, that we just sort of started hopping around the country. So we did sold out shows in Adelaide. We went to Bendigo, which was great. One of my favorite shows in Bendigo, actually. We went to Brisbane. We did 2 nights in Brisbane. And somewhere else that I'm forgetting. But the live shows are really nice. But as for what's next, I mean, Loose Units has been optioned by a production company who I can't name to become a TV show, which is insane news. That's great. And I'm really excited about that. But I got to be honest, that hard seltzer question before really messed me up, because now I'm really into the idea of, because like fiction is where I wanted to go. And it wasn't until I talked to Dad that I realized that some of the most far-fetched stories I'd ever heard had happened to my dad and my mum. So I thought, why not turn them in books? One thing you'll notice with Electric Blue is it is far more outlandish than the first book. And that's very deliberate because I'm trying to move towards, I'm trying to genre morph en route to things. But I mean, it says on the back based on true stories. Like it is. I mean, Harry Potter's based on true stories. There's boys that lived everywhere. No, but as for what's next, I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to run at whatever presents itself. I want to write the sequel like right now. Right now. I've pitched ideas of my wife, Tegan, who actually produces the podcast and came up with the idea for the podcast. And I pitched my idea.
Let's just pause for a moment and shout out Tegan. What a
Oh,
legend.
yeah.
Like,
Shout out
thank
to
you.
you. Everyone's giving you a shout out. She's waving and giving a thumbs up. Yeah, it's the third book. I already know what it's called. I already know how it's structured. And there is a weird, like, kind of thematic twist in the middle, which I think is really exciting. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to say. But, I mean, the book is like, the ink is still wet on this book. So as for what's next, I just want everyone to read this. I mean, I worked with ADHD. It's really hard. Look, this is not I'm not kind of playing for sympathy here, but it's really hard to get things done with this thing I have. And like a lot of people have this, some variants of it, but what happens with ADHD, if you're not into a thing, you can't do it. You need to find a way to become fixated on the thing, and then you can do the thing. I knew I loved the book, and I knew I loved the brand and working with Dad and Tegan and making this all happen when I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like I would get up at 11 p.m. and just start jotting notes down. And every time I made listeners and readers, and every time I signed stuff, or I illustrated this book. I mean, that was a whole new way to get kind of deeply entrenched in it. But I can't stop thinking about this book. I can't stop thinking about the way it smells. Is that weird? Like, it smells good. It's a good, it just smells. It smells like the books that, when you're a kid and you go into a bookstore and you can't afford the big, like the Oswald Puzzle Adventure or the Choose Your Own Adventure or like the Tolkien, and you pick it up and you just cram your face into it and smell it. My book smells good. And I think I'm still not completely over the novelty of being a published author. This is my second book with Penguin. I hope to God they're watching, because I want a third, like right now. I keep kind of waiting. It's like, when you go on a date with someone, you're not sure when to call them back. It's like, when do I ask? Do I ask them now? It's too soon. I can't call them now. It's been like 2 days. Or do I wait like 6 months and play hard to get? Or is that too long? If anyone wants to weigh in, that's much appreciated.
I think what you're going to do is we'll post this. I mean, we're recording right now. We'll post it later. You tag Penguin. I think that's still got a bit of game to it. Just tag. It's not overwhelming. You're not being too extra. Just tag them. It's cool.
If they see it, they see it. If they don't see it, whatever. This is coming off like a therapy session, unless like a library talk.
I've got some more questions. So there was a couple of people that were at the TOF that night, actually, that have said that it was such a fun night and that it was such a great night. Amber is saying that post-COVID, I wish you'd come to the US with a live show, specifically Seattle. So pop that on your list, Seattle.
I love Seattle. I spent a few years doing a podcast called 28 Plays Later. It was a video game podcast. And I would come to Seattle every year for PAX, which is the big kind of video game expo. And we would do live shows there. And I'm a big Twin Peaks fan, so we drove out to Snoqualmie Falls, which is where they shot Twin Peaks. And Dad's a big Twin Peaks fan. I think maybe if you take intersecting Venn diagram circles and the do not intersect, you take Loose Units fans and Twin Peaks fans. It's like very, very little crossover. But I would like to do a live Loose Units in the Double R Diner in Snoqualmie. I think that'd be kind of cool. Just like, 10 people, really, really expensive tickets to justify the exorbitant, flight costs.
You know what? I'd be there. We've just actually started rewatching Twin Peaks, weirdly.
One of the great things about Twin Peaks is that it is magical realism is like basically my favorite thing. I love a story that is slightly magical and a story that never contradicts the existence of that magic. There's stuff that happens in Electric Blue that is patently weird. And not only do I never contradict it as an author, I encourage it. And when I pitch it at Dad and go like, for example, was it really a witch that you dealt with that one time? He looks at me dead serious and goes, yeah, probably. And he's like an agnostic. He doesn't believe in anything, but he believes in evil, I think. Like proper, actual, otherworldly stuff in a kind of way that is very endearing. We never point at it and we never chase vampires, but occasionally in Electric Blue, there is stuff where you will kind of go, that's not right. There is something very wrong with that. I think when this third book happens, it's going to be taken up a gear. But I think Electric Blue is I'm so proud of this stupid book. I love it so much. And what was great is it was very easy to write because just working with Dad, it's like it's all there. The first book was harder, I think, not because I was a worse writer, but because I didn't know Dad as well then. I know Dad so well now. We do 2 podcasts a week. we talk constantly, and I just think I know him better than most people by now, and I hope he knows me better.
So tell us a little bit about that writing process. What advice would you give people that are hoping to write a book, apart from find something that you just can be passionate about and, you know, immerse yourself in? What's your one best piece of advice, Paul, just to put you on the spot?
Yeah, with the way my brain works, picking one thing is impossible. So I'm just going to start throwing some stuff out. Please get up every 15 minutes and stretch. It's so good for your posture. You really need to just keep moving. That's very important. That's less about the writing and more about the fact that I don't want my body to collapse like a wet cake. I think finding something you care about is good. You need to enjoy the process, all that kind of blah, 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 blah. For me, my problem is structure. So if I don't sit there and map out the skeleton of the story first, I'm not going to be equipped to whack meat on those bones. And one of the really valuable lessons I learned from Loose Units was, because it's all based on true stuff, the skeleton was there. I actually had to adhere to this stuff. I've tried writing fiction before and I always floundered because I planned as I went, which is the way the old brain works for me. But with basing it on true stuff and true crime, I couldn't take those liberties. So I actually had to go, well, all right, there's an inbuilt chronology. I actually have to obey certain rules. I can put as much florid weirdness on there and take as many liberties as I want. But at the end of the day, that body needs to be in that patch of earth by the end of the story. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it was really nice to have guidelines and kind of like if you're bowling, it's bumpers. I had like things around me to stop me straying. And as far as the ADHD goes, I would say if you have any kind of brain chemistry like me, the best thing to do is trick yourself into being obsessed with the thing you have to do. Find a thing that you can make, find like an in. For me, it was the last 100 pages of this book that kept me engaged. When you get to those 100 pages, you will understand why. I wrote them first, by the way. I wrote the last 100 pages of Electric Blue before I wrote anything else, and it was those 100 pages that gave me the obsession level and the kind of hook that I needed. One of the best ways to motivate yourself to write is spite. Find someone you don't like who's doing better than you and just let it really fuel you. It's so unhealthy, but it's such a potent source of combustion. I can't tell you how many times pettiness has given me those little, is that bad to admit? Like, because sometimes there's just people you're like, you don't deserve that thing. What are you doing? And then that little spark makes you go, well, yeah, now I have to.
That's fantastic. I love it. Actually, Leanne Moriarty, who's written lots and lots of books, New York Times bestseller, she didn't publish a book until her sister published a book. And her sister called her and said, I'm published. And she threw her kids aside, sat down on the computer, and she hasn't stopped writing since. That was enough. There's 3 sisters, all published authors. I'm sure they're just one-upping each other all the time.
Yeah.
Sibling rivalry.
Yeah, but we only know the one. Well, you and I only know the one. I think it's really fun to kind of find alternate routes to the thing. Electric Blue felt easy to write, but I don't know if it was. I think it just felt easy because I enjoyed it. I think it was actually phenomenally hard to write. I mean, it's like twice as long as the last book. And looking at this going, why was that so easy? I think it's just because I made it more enjoyable. I made the process more enjoyable. The edit was really enjoyable. The feedback was great. The proofreaders were great. My editor over at Penguin, who edited this idiotic book, was so patient with me. If you have a team around you of people that you trust and that are patient, like patience is really, if you know me and you're patient, well done. And Penguin was so patient, and they just made this so easy. So every time I came to give them that extra bit of juice, of course I was going to, because I liked them and they were patient with me. I have never enjoyed working with people as much as I have over the past year. It's just been such a joy. So I guess my final tip would be like, find people you like working with. Even if you, let's say you're a theatre actor and you only ever stay local. If you're happy and that makes you happy, then you're doing it. Also, I'm 37. I can't give people advice on how to live. What am I doing? But I appreciate you asking.
So I love that you say that it was easy to write, because strangely, it's easy to read, despite the subject matter at times. I think that there's that beautiful balance between that storytelling, but then there'll be little funny asides, and then it will jump back to real time and just a funny conversation between you and your dad. Like, it's so beautifully written, it's so engaging that it's like having a chat. Like, you feel like you're there. You feel like you're with John, sitting around chatting with him. I don't even know John, but I love his dress sense. I'm just thinking hard seltzer. Imagine the costumes. Imagine the suede shoes. It could have a whole merch line of suede shoes, not just.
You know what's funny is Dad wouldn't imagine cool detective clothes, so I dressed him against his will in those clothes in the book, and he read the book and said I would never wear that. And I'm like, I don't care. That's what you're wearing, because that's what I dress you in, because you're a doll that I'm moving around like a meat puppet. And now he likes it. Now I sent him some kind of like, I've been doing a bunch of art based on the book and kind of playing around with drawings of the character based on Dad. And book John is a lot more, I mean, let's face it, in the first Loose Units, Dad scissor kicks a man off a moving motorcycle. He couldn't do that in real life. But the great thing about Dad is he's starting to forget what's real and what's not. So he's going, yeah, I could absolutely do that. I'm like, no, Dad, you didn't do that. It's like, it sounds plausible. I'm like, yeah, look, it feels plausible because I'm calling the character, I mean, let's face it. Parents are beautiful, frustrating creatures, right? But what I also told Dad the other day is I'm like, hey, Dad, you'll never die now. He's like, what do you mean? I said, you'll never die because there's a character based on you in a best-selling series of books. Like, you're never going to die. Like, a version of you will always exist out there in the collective unconscious. You're an immortal. And let me tell you something. If someone's got too much of a big head and you tell them they're immortal, it's only going to make it worse. He's become insufferable since then. He wants action figures, which I, for one, am completely behind.
I think it could work. It could maybe work. I love that you narrated your audiobook as well, because when you're just doing John's voice, then just reminds me of the audiobook, and I think you've immortalized him even more, but your version of him, you've imitated your imaginings of him. It's amazing.
It's always a fun moment where you have to do an impression of your dad being irritated at you, and then you have to do an impression of yourself actually being offended that he's offended. It's really tricky. There's a character in Electric Blue called Grey, and Grey is an amalgam of real people mashed into a fairly unashamed kind of tribute to John Pertwee's Doctor from Doctor Who. It's just, there's no subtlety at all. It's fairly grotesque. Penguin picked up on it immediately and didn't care. But that meant that when I got into the audiobook recording for Penguin, I'm sitting in the studio and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to have to do a full-on British accent for hours. Because he talks a lot. And I completely forgot that there's him. How does Mum sound? I can't do a Mrs. Doubtfire, kind of like Terry Jones and Monty Python lady voice. So I just did a slightly gentler version of my voice. It was so nice doing the audiobooks. It was great. One of the shout outs I want to give is my sound engineer over at Penguin, Gregor. He's a musician and he's worked on every big TV show for the past 10 years, including Game of Thrones, he's worked on. And he turned to me and said, hey, do you want me to write some original music for the audiobook? And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then he starts sending me clips. And once you get to that last 100 pages of the audiobook, there's original music. There's 50 different Foley sound effects. There's doors slamming, cars revving. He went absolutely nuts. And then I got Dad into the studio with me to riff back and forth during that last part of the book, to the point where it feels like we kind of did two different books as opposed to two versions of the same book. And that was not something I was expecting. And the audiobook has really kind of been a whole other ballgame. I love narrating stuff. I love talking, obviously. It was really great. And I cannot stress this enough. It was fun to write. And I just want to do another one right now. Right now.
Yeah. It's so cool. Paul, we are almost out of time. So I guess what I'd love to know is, what do you want people to take away from this book?
If you could take away a copy of the book from your local bookstore, that'd be a really important takeaway. Just take it. Just take the book. Don't take
local library also.
Local library, just and not just that. Rent it so much from the library that they have to get more copies in. I know it. it's so funny because I look at most books and I'm like, what would it take for me to actually go across and grab that book? What would it take for me to do that? And oftentimes it takes either 20 people bothering you, or someone you're into has handed you a copy, or, you know, it fell from a great height and you caught it. Like, it's like alchemy, finding that thing that's going to make you grab this book. The cover definitely helps. It's a really great cover. But I think what I'd like you to take away is this is not a normal true crime book. This is not a normal book. I'd like to think that if you are even slightly left of center in your thinking, and if you like anything approaching weird metafiction or black comedy or magical realism or, you know, detective stories or whatever, I think it does have something slightly unusual that might tick your boxes if you consider yourself a little bit odd. Because it's an odd book written by an odd person based on stories told by an odd person. So I think, yeah, if you're going to take anything away, and also, if your parents have interesting stories, do consider getting them to tell them to you, because you never know where it might go.
That's great. I love it. I've got a detective friend that has just messaged me privately saying, give me a copy of that book immediately, please. So I don't think you even have to be that particularly left of centre. I think you can be not left of centre and still get so much out of.
But actually, to that point, I think most people think they're more normal than they are, or normal people, except for normal people who think they're more unusual than they are. You know what I mean? Like, odds are, if you talk loudly about how interesting you are, you're not actually probably not that interesting. Whereas a lot of people are like, I'm not that odd. But then they go home and shave their cat, and you're like, you are weird. You probably should read this book and stop shaving your cats. Yeah, one final thing. I think it might be funny. I tried very hard to make it funny because I think that crime is terrible and that criminals are complex people. And one of the ways people process stuff in the emergency services is they laugh at it. And I think you can depower evil if you make fun of it, mock it, and take it down a notch. And I think that's something that you could probably take away, is that there are other ways to look at the world other than just stressed and giving up.
I think that humour, for me, I just thought it was always very respectful of saying this poor woman, that sort of thing. But definitely the asides, really hilarious. I thought, but it needs to be hilarious because, yeah, there needs to be that balance, or else it's, traumatizing. So it's perfect. And there's lots of true crime comedy podcasts and that sort of thing. It's a thing, isn't it? It's a strange marriage, but it does seem to be what people are attracted to. I think your brain can only take so much before you have to have a laugh.
And have a book written about you, yeah.
Beautiful. So Rosalie's just saying here that the Frankston Emergency Department nurses love it. So yeah, as you were saying.
I will endeavour to come up there and have a very serious injury so we can all meet sometime.
Sounds good. And Maeve Mans is saying that they've got the hard copy and the audio, which is good.
Awesome.
Everyone is just saying, yeah, bring it on. Bring on the next book. Bring on anything else that you can offer us. We would love to experience it.
That's so nice.
Yeah, so that's ace. So I think we've come to the end of the questions and the end. Thank you so much for being generous tonight, and we've gone a little bit over time, but thank you. So what I can tell you now is that Paul's books are available to borrow via Frankston City Library's online library, which you can access for free with your Frankston City Library's membership. If you're not a member of Frankston City Libraries, you can sign up for free online and do it immediately. You can also pop the physical book on reserve for click and collect. I'm not sure, I think there's a few people in line, but the more people that are in line, the more likely we are that we'll be able to purchase another one. So go and reserve it. And you can also grab it, I believe, Robinson's Bookshop in Frankston also stocks the book, so you can shop online there at the moment as well. We'll make sure we pop a link to Robinson's when we share this video across YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. So keep an eye on Frankston City Library's website for some more Frank talks, and we've got some information sessions and workshops coming up. And thank you, Paul, for joining us.
My pleasure.
It was wonderful to chat with you, and good luck with everything. And say hi to Christine and say hi to John for us.
Love that.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you.
They're messaging me frantically right now. Dad has completely disrespected the fact that we're all on. Like, why is he messaging? Like, what's he saying? He's acting as if it's wrapped up. He's saying it went really well. Oh, he said top shelf. Great. That's the thing he always says. Excellent. All right. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Good. He's sticking to the brand. It's okay. Good. All right. Beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Paul. And yeah, we'd love to have you in the library when we are able to have people in again. It would be wonderful to have you down there.
I would love that.
Terrific. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight.